Just with regards to the Sentry, they're going to have to seriously nerf this guy. I mean, against the Thunderbolts, is Bucky going to be the one? Like, come on, they don't really have a like-for-like match there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I'm all for it.
But what if Bucky and the Sentry have the mother with the same first name?
What does that mean? Why did you say that name? Save Martha!
That'll stop the Sentry right in his tracks.
You take Martha out your mouth.
That's cinema.
I knew that'd get you, Jonathan. I knew.
It's a simple question, and I want to hear everybody's take on it. And as someone who's probably been away from the game a bit lately, maybe over the past few years, Andy, are you relatively caught up with the current MCU? I know that you said you haven't seen all the Disney Plus shows.
Yeah, for the MCU, I haven't seen. I've missed 2 or 3 shows in there, but yeah, the movies I'm caught up.
The shows are really where the political agendas and just an overall direction. You know, you see really what some of the Disney Marvel activists want to put in their content with the Disney Plus shows. It really starts to ring true in a lot of those shows, and a lot of those shows are failing miserably. I mean, these shows aren't doing the numbers that they expected them to do. They came out the gate, as far as the shows are concerned, with WandaVision, which was a smashing success, but we see that it didn't have a lot of those built-in agendas into it. And now some of the stuff where they really lean heavily into it, we're seeing things start to fail. I'm not going to be delusional by any means and say that I think that the MCU is even close to the point where they're going to have to close up shop, because realistically, they would have to have 3, 4, maybe even 5 flops in a row at the box office. The first real true flop they had as far as the movies are concerned was the Marvels, but it still made a little bit over $200 million. The reason that was a flop is because when you consider the budget and the marketing and everything else combined, it didn't quite cover all those costs and they didn't break even. If I had to ask you guys the question, just the plain and simple question, is the MCU failing? What would you say?
I would say that the MCU is in crisis management right now to prevent them from failing. So no, they're not going straight down, but they realize that their nose is pointed toward the ground and they need to turn it up. If you look at the next couple of projects that are coming out for the MCU, the next one, you talk about the Disney Plus shows. I kind of am watching less and less of those, even though I'm a big MCU fan, big Marvel fan. I will not watch Agatha all along because I didn't like Hocus Pocus, and I didn't even like Hocus Pocus 2. And those are the only 2 comparable things. This is not a show for a Marvel viewer. So they reached out. Now they're going to start pulling back. Then you're going to get another Captain America movie with Falcon as a Captain America, with Sam Wilson as Captain America, Thunderbolts. That'll kind of end this, and then we're going to start up. We get a fresh start with the Fantastic Four, I think. And I think hopefully if they do that correct, then we can go right back up and go right up to the sky. But right now they're in crisis management because they see that they're trending downwards, if not failing completely.
And Kevin Feige literally scrapped all the plans that they had for the first iteration of Daredevil Born Again. They were probably 60% complete as far as shooting goes, and they scrapped everything and basically started from scratch. They kept a few things because initially they didn't have plans to bring back Karen or Foggy, and now they had this new interesting villain with the Muse, which I've heard is a very, very terrifying Daredevil villain. I don't read the books, but I've heard that it's almost like a character that would make the Joker say, wow. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about Frank Castle coming back. I even hope that we get to see Mike Coulter come back as Luke Cage. I enjoyed him as Luke Cage, even if the last half of his first season wasn't very good, and the second season definitely wasn't very good either. But you get that with a lot of the Netflix stuff. But yes, I think that they are in full crisis mode.
It's not a short, quick question that you can answer quickly, but I think John summed it up pretty well. Definitely in crisis mode. They've made some big mistakes, which I think they've paid the price for now, and they've realized it. So I think Kevin Feige is taking things up, restructuring some things, but it's going to take a lot for the MCU to fail. With the Russo brothers back on board and the way things are going, even with Robert Downey Jr. now being hired as Dr. Doom, which I'm not overly fond of that idea, but it shows you that they are going for big things and they've got big plans. And with Fantastic Four and those things coming, Thunderbolts, I don't know if they're going to be what people want it to be. I hope so. But ultimately, I think they're going to steer the ship in the right way again.
You're both right, Adam and John. I think that they saw the writing on the wall and they said, okay, we need to fix this. I actually think that getting the Russo brothers back is the biggest thing, showing to the audience that, yeah, we're going to do this the right way. For them to do a good job, I really think that they probably have to be not just aware, but also involved in the steps leading up to Avengers 5, Avengers 6. I think with them saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, retroactively looking at the details back through the plot threads that they're going to have leading up to it, they're going to be on the right track, because they're not just going to say, okay, so where are we at? Let's make a movie based on this. I think the Russo brothers' name is on the line. They're going to be saying, okay, we want this to happen. We want this to happen. We want this worked through the MCU ahead of time. Because of that, I think that they're going to recover. They're going to do well. They have to start working on IPs that people like and know. I think they hit it out of the park with Guardians of the Galaxy, but I think that was almost a fluke. They did it so well. It's just not something they can take a chance on again, I don't think.
Guardians 3, I know this may sound crazy to say, but Guardians 3 almost felt like it was going to be a shoe-in. It had already built up to so much success, even though the second Guardians wasn't amazing or anything, but, it's still a solid sequel. They finally come to a point where they realize, like, oh, man, we probably should stop focusing on all this crap and junk that doesn't matter, like turning this one character into a lesbian or whatever the case may be. Like, we need to start putting our focus on the story, the source material, and like Andy said, what the fans love. We have been dying to see a Fantastic Four movie for so long, done right in the MCU. And I think this cast, although I'm not a huge fan of Pedro as Mr. Fantastic, I think that it could work. And all the rest of the cast, it seems like a solid casting choice with most of the cast there. Focusing on the things that matter, I think, is probably the most important thing that they could do.
I think Pedro Pascal, if you saw him in The Last of Us,
yes,
I think he has the chops to do it. He can act. It's if he's likable. If he's likable in this without being whimsical. If Reed can really pull it together and be, he has a hard time understanding humor, I think, and that's where the juxtaposition with Human Torch is really going to play. I think that's going to make or break it. It's the relationships between these characters. And if they do it well, then they have staying power. I know it's set in the 60s, but I think they have staying power as a thread line throughout this whole thing to lead up into Doomsday and then Secret Wars.
Yeah, I think that the plan is to keep this version of the Fantastic Four around for many, many years. Like you were saying with Pedro, that's not the problem. He's a very likable and very funny and charming guy, but I don't really think about that when I see a Reed Richards. Reed Richards isn't Tony Stark to me. Reed Richards is a somewhat not very likable character that's very sharp, not even so much like Doctor Strange, what they've turned him into in the MCU. He's more witty, and I guess a lot of the MCU characters are witty at this point. And once again, I think that he has potential to blow expectations out of the water and change my mind, but that's kind of where I'm at with that right now. I just don't think that he's the perfect or first choice for Reed Richards. He's a great actor, charming guy. We'll see how he does. Also, with Robert Downey Jr., like John said, it's a very bold decision, and it's a decision that gets a lot of people talking about the MCU again. Do I like it? No, I really don't. I know that it leans into the multiverse concept. What if? We're leaning into a lot of that these days in the MCU. Andy, if you haven't seen What If, by the way, I don't care what Jared or anybody else from the M6P says. I enjoy it. I think it's a fun watch. And for somebody like you who's a comic reader, you might like it. There's also rumors, Andy, that they're going to be bringing the Sentry into the Thunderbolts film. What do you think about that? I know that's one of your favorite characters.
Bro, if that's true, I'm all about it. I would love to see the Sentry. I love that guy. I know that he is not a very likable character. Nobody really likes him. But, dude, contrasting him with Superman and saying the struggle, having all the power of Superman, And then just the struggle of fighting evil nonstop. The more you use your power, the more the void. Yeah, I had not heard that rumor. I'm all about that. That would be really awesome. And also, who doesn't love somebody who rips villains in half? I mean, come on.
Well, if you tie those together too, the interesting thing is the Sentry could kind of introduce the Fantastic Four. And maybe they are suffering from the same thing that he did, is when he was introduced, nobody remembered. And the Fantastic Four movie is taking place in the 60s. And so maybe whatever caused people to forget that the Sentry existed also caused people to forget that the Fantastic Four existed. That could be a way to bring them into the universe with a story-driven way of why is this taking place 50 years ago and we don't know anything about it. I think that where we are in the MCU right now is on a blackboard that's going to be erased. Like everything you're talking about, do more, that's probably going to start with the Fantastic Four, right? We might have some threads, like what happened in She-Hulk, what happened in Agatha all along, what happened in Loki. Those will be a nice little Easter egg, but they're not going to matter that much. I don't think they're going to make a difference when you go see Doomsday or when you go see Secret War. It's going to be what happened in the Fantastic Four and beyond. I'm hoping, because I don't want to have to go back and watch Agatha all along or Loki season 2, which people like. I just gave up. It didn't hook me. So
Loki season 2 was a lot better than the first season of Loki. I wasn't a big fan of the first season of Loki. I enjoyed
Jonathan, what are you talking about? The last episode of Loki season 2. But come on.
He's the
is that it? Is that all I have to watch?
Yeah.
The last episode?
Yep. That's it.
Good
Pretty
to know.
important. Just with regards to the Sentry, they're going to have to seriously nerf this guy. I mean, against the Thunderbolts, is Bucky going to be the one? Like, come on, they don't really have a like-for-like match there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I'm all for it.
But what if Bucky and the Sentry have the mother with the same first name?
What does that mean? Why did you say that name?
Save Martha!
That'll stop the Sentry right in the track.
You take Martha out your mouth.
That's cinema.
I knew that'd get you, Jonathan. I knew.
Adam is definitely a DCEU apologist. Somewhat to a degree. There's a lot of aspects that I loved about the DCEU, like Ben Affleck and like Henry Cavill as Batman and Superman, but there was a lot of things that they just didn't get right. But as far as the MCU goes, to summarize everything that I feel, they're not currently failing, but if they don't make drastic changes, which it looks like they have over the past 6 months, and they also have to shake out of this pattern where they give us an amazing project and then they give us a really crappy project. That's where we're at now. We just got Deadpool and Wolverine. We're all on the high, but guess what comes out in a few months? Agatha all along. And this is, I don't know, like this, once again, it's a very obscure character that people seem to like a little bit from the WandaVision show because of the actress, who's really great, by the way, Kathryn Hahn. But yeah, it's just not a good strategy. Of course, there's a gay witch in this coven. I mean, we have to check off that box, right?
There's a lot of box checking, but I'll say this to Marvel. If your character cannot sustain a comic book, which you need to sell about 30,000 a month, but you can't even sustain a comic book series, you probably shouldn't put them in primetime on a TV show. Agatha Harkness was an old lady that was a tertiary character in the Fantastic Four. Why is she getting a... I like the actress, like you said, but I don't care about her. She was supposed to train the Scarlet Witch. She didn't. She became an enemy. Okay. Now you're giving a villain her own show that wasn't a villain in the comics, that barely had any. I don't get it. They're straying so far from the comic book material, and they're suffering. And I think Feige recognizes that. I don't know if these other creators do. I think they just say, oh, it's a Marvel property. We can do whatever we want. No, that's what you did in the early 2000s when the comic book market, the movie market was nothing. Now that it's successful because they wore brightly colored costumes, because they were characters that people like us cared about and have spent now 20, 30 years reading their books. So have invested a lot of time. There's a lot of good characters you can still make. You don't have to make an Agatha Harkness show.
You know what I would love to see 10,000 times more than an Agatha show? I would love to see a William Dafoe Green Goblin origin story, or not even the origin. I guess we got that in the film, but like, what happened those few years after, like what they could do so many different things, that the fans really would be ravenous about. Tell me that the fans would not be super hyped if we got a William Dafoe Green Goblin Disney Plus show.
Absolutely.
I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place because they have to sell subscriptions to Disney Plus, but the people that do not subscribe, are they going to be missing out on these giant nuggets of like either Easter eggs or plot lines or plot points that are progressing through the MCU? You have to make it count and say, hey, well, the reason why it is like this in Thunderbolts, or the reason why it's like this in Doomsday, is because of Agatha all along. And you got to go back and watch that. Well, you either make it valuable so that you can sell it because there's something magic that happened there that really enlightens the entire story, or you alienate your audience by saying like, hey, anybody who doesn't have Disney Plus, you missed out on this critical piece. Like the comic books, when you're talking about like Fear itself, or when you're talking about AVP or what, or AVX or whatever, you know, you have all these storylines that happen on the outside, all these tie-in books, and some of them, if it's a character you like, you buy it. If it's a character you don't like, well, it doesn't affect the huge story. Maybe you miss one plot point. When you're talking about budgets like this, it's such a heavier cost than developing a comic book. I don't think you can have that many misses. I don't think that Disney, and I don't think that Marvel Studios is going to be happy if you have that many misses on things that just don't matter.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a big part of the reason why the Marvels flopped at the box office, because a lot of mainstream audience goers didn't really know who Miss Marvel was or Photon. They felt like they needed to know who they were, but they didn't because they didn't watch the Disney Plus shows. So that's another problem that we're going to be dealing with the Thunderbolts. You got John Walker, who nobody's going to know unless they watch The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Great character, by the way, but nobody's going to know who he is. Yelena Belova, the same thing, right? I mean, oh, that's right. Never mind. She was in the Black Widow film, but the film kind of went straight to Disney Plus back in the day.
Yeah,
Kind
the
of
film
like a series, wasn't it?
wasn't a Yep.
Yeah, you're putting together characters from a lot of different things with the Thunderbolts. I'm kind of looking forward to it because I have watched all of the things related. But you guys make great points. Like if I was just, should I go watch this action movie? Well, who's that guy? What? You can watch an action movie with action stars and not have to know their backgrounds. It could be kind of mysterious. Hopefully they play it that way. And then it's just a little added bonus for those of us that did. But if there's plot points that you needed to know who Yelena Belova's sister was, the Black Widow, and she's related to the Red Guardian. Okay, so is this a Black Widow sequel? Or is this a Captain America and Falcon Winter Soldier sequel? Or is this because the MCU universe is based on the comics, which have done that? We really haven't seen this in movies. What is the Thunderbolts? Is it a sequel to a movie? No, it's its own movie, but it's based on a bunch of movies that came before. So they are taking risks with this. Will they pay off is kind of one thing we're trying to see in this balance of why is the MCU in a nosedive. That could play a part of it in addition to all of the TV series and just juggling too many plates. I think 2024 is probably the least MCU output we've had since almost 2010 or 2011, right? And it's because they had to take a step back and reassess what are we doing, what works, what doesn't.
And speaking of Captain America 4, they've had to do so many reshoots with that film that it's almost going to have to make $600-700 million just to break even at the box office, which is insane. I think they've already spent like $400 million just
to Harrison Ford
budget.
Get off my plane.
I'm always rooting for the MCU to succeed. I love these movies, obviously. I mean, I got all this memorabilia behind me. I've been doing this podcast for 3 years. I love Marvel, and I want these movies to do well. I'm just worried that, like a lot of other studios in Hollywood, they're going down this deep, dark path that nobody really, like your mainstream core audience, doesn't care about that stuff.
We do not want it. We do not want what they're giving us. It's unfortunately the minority is the loudest, and they seem to appeal to the people that are making the most noise and not the people who make up the majority of the comic book moviegoers. So that's their biggest problem. But I think they are realizing it. Let's maybe not talk too soon. We'll see what happens with the next couple of things, but hopefully they just give us what we want, and that's good comic book movies. No agendas.
Right. Just let me turn my brain off. I don't want to be preached about global warming or you should accept this or accept that. I just give me a fun movie, a dumb fun movie. Maybe not as dumb and fun as Blade Trinity, but you know, a little more fun than dumb.
Right. Well, I always say we're kind of the target audience. This panel of four right here, we're all, men of a certain age, guys, and we like action and explosions, turn little plot, little mystery, little intrigue. They don't put explosions in Arnold Schwarzenegger in Lifetime movies because the ladies watching Lifetime don't want to see that. So don't put all the things in our movies that we don't want to see. I mean, it's simple. There's an audience for this. There's an audience for that. Everything doesn't have to be for everybody. It's okay to have an action movie for guys to eat popcorn and zone out on the couch to and watch. That's fine.
We also like to see boobs. Oh, goodness. I kid. We don't like any of that.
I think one of the things, though, that we have to keep in mind, like, is we're going on almost 20 years here of MCU movies. First one came out in 2008, and so the audience has grown up, and so I think that they're dealing with that as well. I think that there's two things that they're really dealing with. One, we've used these characters. Are we just going to put these characters up against new villains, or are we going to put them up against each other, or can we explore different, when we go to the secondary, the B list, the C list, are there ones that we can still harvest? Are there A lists that they just got the rights to a bunch of the Fox library. But the second thing is their audience is growing up. And so they're actually experiencing the problem that the comic book industry has experienced for decades now. Like, wait a minute, who are we writing these to? We used to write them to the kids, but now everybody's so intrigued. Now we're writing to 40 and 50-year-old guys. Are we alienating, or are they aging out? And so I think that the MCU is experiencing a little bit of this, and they're having a hard time dealing with it. And if we do what we all are saying here and just give to the audience and give them what they want, how will they bring in new? When you're talking about breasts, I know, let's be serious for a second. You're catering to an audience that's older because that eliminates a bunch of viewership there. So what are they going to do? Suddenly we got our first R-rated MCU movie. So now are they going to make more to make sure that they capture that audience? And how are they going to bring in new film? And how is it all going to still connect cohesively, or does it have to?
As long as the cleavage is tasteful, Andy, that's all you really need, okay? No, seriously. There's a way. If you give, like we're talking about, this core audience of Marvel movie fans what they want, we don't want our agendas, our political agendas put into the film. We want you to give us a film that is stripped and void of any and all political agendas. And I think that you can not only bring in your same audience, but bring everyone together with a film like that. You always hear about people talking about toxic fandoms, whether it be Star Wars toxic fandom or Marvel toxic fandom. You wouldn't have that toxic fandom if you gave a film like Twisters that is just devoid of any and all political agendas. Just give us a fun movie with good special effects, and it's true somewhat to the source material. That's all we want.
Twisters weren't caused by global warming then? I didn't see that one.
No, they were not. They were just caused by Dorothy or whatever happened in the first one. I don't know those movies that well.
It's not too much to ask for. It really isn't.
No, it's not. And once again, I think that that's going to bring all the audience in, not just the right or the left or whatever. Let's all be happy and hold hands. Whoever you vote for in November, keep that to yourself. You don't have to bombard your political opinions on Facebook either. But let's just watch a movie together. That's all we need.
I think that's one factor. Over time, that's going to be a less and less and less alienating factor, just because of the problems that they're going to have of running out of compelling characters that the audience doesn't feel are recycled over and over and over again. I think that is going to be a harder mountain to climb.
And I think to that point, as just in this discussion, it makes me think that, so the next big one is the Fantastic Four, followed by 2 Doom Avengers movies. The Fantastic Four, if you can break up the Marvel comic book universe, you're a comic book guy, into the Avengers, which was the first phase of the Marvel MCU. Now, the second phase, even though they have their own number of phases, could be the Fantastic Four. There's lots to go over there. You can make cosmic stories. You're bringing in the Silver Surfer. And you haven't heard anything about the X-Men in a while, except for the cartoon. So you can push back the X-Men so you don't have this problem. So you just have this cycle of movies be all about Fantastic Four and their tangents. Maybe bring in the Inhumans. Maybe you bring in the Silver Surfer, like we said, a good Inhuman. There's a lot of characters that stems from Kirby and Stan Lee's Fantastic Four that can establish their own version of the MCU. And then from there, you can go on to the X-Men, and maybe that way you're not recycling the same old characters and getting worried about it. But as far as the age, you figure it is almost 20 years ago. So some little kid went to see Iron Man in 2008. It's probably going to take his little kid to go see the Fantastic Four in 2025. I think you can maintain the audience by just keeping them on, by making good movies that don't have a political agenda. The bad guy's a bad guy. And not because he's a bad guy because he voted for this one or that one. He's a bad guy because he's bad and he wants to do bad things. That's it.
Only time will tell. It's also really crazy thinking back to 2012 when Andy and I, on the original Comic Book Cinema, were putting out little podcasts on iTunes. And at that time, we just had no idea. We had just gotten the first Avengers film, and I think Iron Man 3 was about to come out. But we just had no idea how crazy of a wild ride we were going to get at that point. MCU, Disney, do better. Just like the speech that the Falcon gave to the senator, I'm giving that speech to you right now. Kevin Feige, do better. You can do better. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you check out Andy and John on the M6P. You can also find Mr. Adam on Instagram. And don't forget to check us out on TikTok, Instagram, at Real Comic Book Cinema. You can also find us on Facebook and probably most other social media platforms. And if you're listening to us in podcast format, we thank you. And until next time, have a great day.